audience that
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics Monday on the IBM TV network. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, and along with Peter Bennett, Ben Banerjee, and Sasha Starr, we're going to be discussing the economy, and this will end our season. Peter told me, reminded me to say that, until September the 20th, because I'm going to be in Switzerland visiting Ben. Well, not this Saturday, but next Saturday. So anyway, yeah, this will be our last one. We will be joined on the half hour by the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. He did email me. He's said, I'll be here. And so we know that David will be discussing the America 2040, still a superpower. But we do have Ben Banerjee, the head of the Swiss Impact Investment Association in Zug, Switzerland. I'll never be able to pronounce it right. But Ben, you may want to give us an update on what's going on our great European vacation, because when I'm looking at it, I've already had some problems. Fires in Greece. My airline went under, Alitalia. So when I fly to Greece, I have to come back through the KLM World Dutch Airlines because Alitalia went under and canceled the flight.
Wow.
COVID is everywhere. There's protest in Paris, and I got a 3-day layover in Paris. And I'm going like, and then COVID's everywhere. So maybe you can give us an update on what's going on in the great European Union, Ben, because my wife is going, is it safe to go over there now? I mean, what's happening over there, Ben?
I mean, there are a couple of really good, because I myself was traveling. I came back yesterday evening from France. The rules and regulations are changing on day-to-day basis. For example, even now to go to a normal cafeteria or a restaurant, you need your COVID certificate always with you. So we have that on our phones. I think in US also you must be having the same thing. So yeah, well, and the fire in Greece and the flood in Germany.
Oh,
so
flood in
I would
Germany.
say
I forgot that. I'm
welcome.
not going to Germany, but right, flood in Germany. Yeah.
No, but the flood is in Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. It has affected nearly the whole of West Europe. So I would say these are really a wake-up call for the climate change and the environmental damage we are facing here. So, and today also the report of the IPCC came out, which is quite negative. So yeah, so I thought today one of the topic was the greatest security threat to America, and I would say this is one of the most important one, the climate change. It's a massive threat, whether it is economically or military in every way. So I think that's a stand-in position. But yes, please keep up to date with day-to-day information before coming, because it's not, European Union doesn't function as one entity. It's every country for itself. So
Right.
Each and every country is coming with new rules and regulations every day.
Right. I do have my my COVID-19 card from the CDC, so I'm carrying it with me. I made backup copies for everything. And my wife was very concerned, especially about the fires in Greece, whether or not we should take that flight down. I said, look, I don't know. But once we get there, then we'll know. Pardon?
That should be fine. The fires have not, to my knowledge, have not reached any major city or the airports or something.
Right.
And for the COVID, what I would advise you, I don't know if you guys have this COVID certificate on your phone. It
Um,
looks something like this.
yeah.
We all
I
have
could
it.
take a picture of it. I got a hard copy. So
It's
I
generally in Europe, they always look at this on the phone, and
really
they have a reader which tells them whether it is real and whether it's green.
okay.
So this software you may have to download and install on your computer.
By the way, you just gave me some good advice. I'll have to go check the CDC whether or not they actually have it, so I can put it on the phone.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's on Apple Store or the Android Store. You can find it everywhere. It's called COVID certificate,
okay,
and then CDC should give you a code with which you have to register.
okay, all right.
And they are
Now, but
everywhere here.
I don't want to interrupt, but I have a really interesting question for Ben, at least a question, and I'd preface it. But Nick, are you finished with your travel information? I don't want to.
My travel plans. I'm going to go visit Ben. What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, I just meant,
good dinner.
did Ben have to tell you anything else that's critically important about the travel plans or no?
No, I think we're good for right now.
Okay, so let me raise a controversial subject because, look, I believe I'm agnostic on climate change. You know, I am not convinced 100%, and I lean towards it. And I've looked at the data, but first, so let me preface this with a few points. First of all, I went on a tour of Glacier Bay in Alaska, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know, and the park ranger on the ship said, where we are sailing now, we would have been under a mile of ice 300 years ago. A mile of ice in Glacier Bay. So he said it's been melting for 300 years. Now that's way before the Industrial Revolution. So so that's the first point. The second thing is climate's always changed. Third of all, you know, the amounts that it's changed, they're talking about a degree, a quarter degree. You know, I mean, again, climate's always changed, but also, you know, I probably is warming. The world is probably warming because I've seen it kind of exponential growth, you know, in some of the data. But then other people argue, oh, it's, you know, measurements and stuff. The last point I'd make is when people say, oh, it's a weather event due to that drives me crazy. And maybe I'm wrong, but, you know, it's like, oh, we had big hurricanes this year. They don't mention that in the United States for the last few years. We've had almost no hurricanes. But then when we have a big hurricane season, climate change, the world is ending. Oh, rainstorms. The world has always had this event. I mean, the world has always had floods and rainstorms and droughts, and you know, it's an ever-changing climate. And one last thing I have to throw in, and then you can answer it all. In. Look, my weatherman can't get the weather right tomorrow. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. On Saturday, my wife said there's 0% chance of rain on Sunday, and I said no, it's 100% because I watered the grass. Guess what happens? It rains overnight. It rains a little bit in the morning. They can't get it right 24 hours in advance. So, with all those factors, that's why I'm agnostic because, you know, and I think it probably is warming, and it could be partly, you know, man-made. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty here. What do you think, Ben?
I think there is absolutely no uncertainty on this point. The temperatures that are being measured, especially, for example, in Netherlands, the summer this year, it has never been that warm. In Scandinavia, I travel very often to Scandinavia, the glaciers, it has never, ever been that warm, never in any recorded history. So this 0.25 or 5% is, that's another point which I want to come to, but I'll come to it later. But the temperature peaks which we are reaching, every year it is breaking the record of previously. So and these are breaking all recorded amounts.
So
Even in the
how much?
poles,
By how
even
much?
in the poles where the temperatures have never been above zero, there the temperatures are being recorded at plus 30, plus 35. Never ever recorded.
Oh, so that's big differences.
These are huge differences, and these have never ever been recorded. And when we are speaking about the average, that's which confuses people, is that when we speak about a global average change of 1.5 degrees or something, I'll just add, I remember one thing about statistics. I think Nick must be a statistics specialist, where it says if your head is in an oven or in a furnace and your feet is in a freezer, you're on average quite comfortable. And unfortunately, that is what statistics is
That's
about.
true.
So the changes which are taking, the average global change may seem to be 0.5% or 1%, whatever. But the impact on the ground level, for example, in Canada, temperature has crossed 50 in places. In India, temperature is crossing 50. These have never, ever been like that. So if
Okay, so
somebody
it's
tries
on
to,
the north and the south of the hemisphere. Both sides seem to be
both
warming
sides
up
are
now.
hitting. Also,
You're very convincing. Okay, that's
no.
interesting.
These data are all there because we work with 24 universities who are. You must be, Nick must have told you I'm in the board also of CLC, the Climate Leadership Coalition. So we have 24 universities working, doing research all over, and especially now we have the data access from NASA and from ESA, who have not only the data of today, but they have the data of the past many decades. It's quite horrible what's going on. If you look at the drought region, where the agriculture, the desertification of Africa, more and more, it's hundreds of kilometers
Yeah,
of
but
land
that's
is
been happening
becoming
for a long
desert.
time too, though. That's been happening.
Yes and no, but never in such a short time span.
Right. Yeah.
It has,
It's getting.
yeah, it,
So you're saying it's accelerating.
it
Is
is
it
accelerating.
accelerating the warming?
Yes, it is accelerating very fast. And the impacts, I mean, the floods we have now in Germany or in West Europe, it has never been expected. Because these are very modern and very advanced countries. So I'm from Netherlands. We have one of the world's most advanced water security system against water. Even we were not prepared. Even Netherlands was not prepared for this extent. So it is
Uh,
leading up too fast.
Ben, and also I read in that report that all these changes are irreversible. Is that true? Is that what you believe?
If we do not do something drastic in the next 5 years, most of these changes are becoming irreversible. And if you forget all the changes about the human life and everything, forget it. And even if you look at only on the economical aspect, the economical damage is immense. Just on climate change, we are losing. I thought it was $3 or $4 trillion per year, the damage which is caused worldwide. And it is being accelerated, especially with things like forest fire. Forest fire is accelerating the damage. Loss of biodiversity. Biodiversity contributes nearly 20 trillion every year to our economy. But the way it is shrinking, it cannot contribute. It cannot keep on contributing that kind of amounts of money into our economy. Where is our economy going to get these monies from?
Ben,
Interesting.
and one thing, what I've read it in a book by Yuval Harari, lessons, 21 lessons for 21st century, I think, that the tragedy is that no one country in the world can do anything about climate change at all. It's only a cooperation of all countries. They
Yeah,
can change the
yeah.
picture. It's not too late now. It could be done, but any single country or even 5 countries or 7 countries, they're helpless against that.
Very true. But I would say in this case, if you look at the big players, the biggest players are China alone is more than one quarter of the world's production. Then you have EU, US, India. I think if you take the four big guys and combine them, you already make a considerable impact because you also have to look at per person production. So each American produces nearly double to 4 times of CO2 than each Chinese, which in fact is still 8 or 10 times more than each Indian, which again is many times more than each African.
You see, this
So
is a dilemma, Ben, which you raise, which is, let's say you're a country, like China or India, but especially China, which, look, China's doing a quarter of the pollution of the world, you said, and I knew it was high. So, but they have the argument, look, we're just developing, and and in other places, I read recently, I think 30% of people in the world don't even have heating fuel to cook with.
mhm.
So you say, let's say you're a poor African country or you're China, and you say, look at all our poor people. Look at our people. Why shouldn't we have the American standard? But
Exactly.
but China's not doing anything about. They won't. They have no obligations under this European agreement. Pretty much, it's like, okay, in the future maybe we'll do something. So they're asking the developed countries to do all the work, but they're growing so quickly. But
Mhm.
so the problem is probably not going to get solved at this pace. I mean, because I don't know what's India doing, by the way? Are they
You're very. I mean, I'll come to India. You're very correct about China. That China it wants to achieve the same or wants to have the same for its citizens what the developed world has, and there has been a pure link about development or life standard with the CO2
Right.
emission. So the richer the people get, the more CO2 emission comes. But that can be broken. That has already been broken by countries like United Kingdom and Finland, that their life standard is increasing, but the CO2 emission is not increasing. CO2 emission decreasing. Now coming back to China,
Right, but
yes,
that's from a
indeed.
very high level. In other
Yeah,
words, let
exactly.
me make that point. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and this whole thing is fascinating. But so let's say, I have a car or I have a two-car family, and we get an engine that's more efficient, or we switch to EVs, which may be more energy efficient. So now, okay, I've reduced my carbon footprint from, 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 to 8. But
Yeah,
then the people in China are like, but I'm at a 1, or maybe in China I'm at a 2 or a 3, and I want to move up to a 6. And
yeah,
in Africa, maybe we're at a 0, and we want to move up to a 1 or a 2.
yeah.
So
But
it's
but but
it's a
China.
big dilemma.
What I wanted to add about China is already moving extremely fast towards green energy. They
Yeah.
are already the fastest, the biggest green energy producers. They are in the wind energy. So we should. This whole idea that China is behind is not true. They are really, really converting fast.
Well,
In
they're
our
making efforts, but they're also,
Yeah,
but I could tell you now, because on the investing show we cover this
yeah,
more, and I'm a big energy. I look at energy a lot, and I could tell you from the other side, the energy usage forecasts,
yeah.
and first of all, China, yeah, they're doing that, but they're also making deals in Africa to get oil, and
I was just going to say that
yeah,
yes,
and they
they
can
are
reduce
exporting it.
by getting rid of coal. So,
Yeah,
but if you look at, like, for instance, the EIA, the Energy Information Administration
yeah,
forecast of world usage, because I use that in the investing show. We're
yeah.
Modern Investing with Sasha. That's our stock show, and options and dividend
Ben,
info.
you're welcome to
And
come on.
It's a
yeah,
great
I'm
show.
plugging it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I love to plug it. So, on our investing show, we look at energy, and I'm a big energy investor. I mean, I have about 22% now in my portfolio in certain pipelines, and but I looked at all the forecasts over and over again because I don't want to lose a lot of money if
Mhm.
and the forecasts are basically for natural gas to be about much higher in 2040 and 2050, maybe
Yeah.
a third higher. Coal to drop, but not even that much. But
Mhm.
it's dropping. And then oil to be about flat, in 30 years, 40 years. And so, maybe oil will be down. I wouldn't be surprised. Coal could go down further. But when you look at total fossil fuels, what you have is two factors: more efficiency, but more growth around the world
Yeah.
in developed, non-developed countries, and more people who are, entering the energy market. So it's a real battle.
Energy is very interesting because we have funds in energy. They're how do you say it? Producing more than 20-25% per year interest rate. We have a couple of funds, and in our TV show also we had the owner of one of the Europe's biggest energy company who came. That the energy is an extremely important field, and this is where also the difference is going to make. If you look at Rockefellers or things who are completely disinvesting from the fossil fuel, that energy is more and more all over the world. The trend is moving towards renewable energies, and it is catching up fast. EU is catching up, China is catching up, everybody. On the other hand, if you look at the coal and the fossil fuel, that is going very fast towards stranded assets. So as an investor, because we also are investing in energies,
Mhm.
as an investor, fossil fuel is a dead investment. Most of the
Oh,
banks here are already starting to pull out.
you see, that's the
So
talk, but that's not the reality. I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. Because I think solar and wind are becoming a larger percentage of the pie.
yeah,
There's no doubt about it. And there may
yeah,
be very good investments there too, although I can't quite figure those out. But because they're already high priced and, assuming growth in the future. But if you look at the fact that, okay, it's becoming a bigger piece of the pie, but the pie is growing much bigger.
yeah,
We're about to have, I think it was the forecast for this year now, next quarter, next year, the most oil demand ever. We're approaching that.
And
So,
I know, and that is what is the scary part, because
right, that's what I'm saying. So you say, okay, we'll do more solar, more wind, more this, but the problem is, well, there's multiple problems. One is, well, there's so many problems from that I know from the investment standpoint. First of all, the increased usage around the world. Growing populations. Look,
that is the biggest problem.
We're 7 billion now. In 2050, they're saying 9 billion. That's 2 billion more people. That's 25% more people using energy to begin with.
Right.
Second of all, a lot of these solutions may or may not work that well because, for instance, take EVs. EVs are the wave of the future in cars because, first of all, you can't have a driverless car unless it's an EV, which is an interesting fact because they have to be run by so it's natural gas, but in the end, and electricity, well, let me rephrase. It's electricity, but it's getting it from a utility, which is probably burning natural gas, or some other fuels. Nuclear's
every country. If you look at Norway has the biggest EV coverage. They are getting the electricity from hydroelectric or geothermal. So Europe is paying very much attention to where the electricity for the EV cars are coming from.
Yeah, Europe's doing a better job in many ways than the rest of the world.
EV is one of the solutions. You also have the hydrogen, which is also now coming up very fast all over Europe.
But again, the EV has to be powered. And so, but admittedly, look, Germany's had a lot of nuclear plants, which is very mixed opinion, obviously. A lot of people, there's been a lot of reductions in the United States of nuclear because they're afraid, what if it blows up? Fukushima in Japan, so that's a tough situation. Plus, with all the thing, okay, let's do solar. Let's do, take solar. How much silver do we have? And EVs too, by the way. Is there going to be shortages of lithium? Is there going to be shortages of silver? There's a lot of questions about what the cost of these things are going to be. And I was going to say windmills. It turns out that building a windmill may take more energy, the building of it, than it saves.
But there is technologies coming up which is cheaper, and by the solar, what you mentioned is these are supply-oriented energy production. But in Europe, if I look only at Europe, Greece is a small country, itself gets enough solar energy to be able to give the energy to fulfill all the demands of Germany, France put together.
Really?
Greece.
Wow.
Yeah, so much.
In what year? In what year?
No, they have it already now. They do not have the production capacity yet, but the sun is there. So do
you think there will be shortages in solar material like silver and other things that they use, or you think that'll work itself out?
There are also a lot of alternatives coming up for that, because the problem with the EVs is that you need charging stations, and these charging stations are a huge investment. And what you mentioned yourself is correct, that the initial investment to renewable energy is always very high. But for that purpose, now all the financial institutions, I don't know if you read that EU is banning all petroleum-driven cars, petrol and diesel in 10 years' time.
No, I did not know that.
No, I think half of them, only 50%. I think 50% will be still allowed to be gasoline and diesel-driven.
No more production. So it will take time to phase it out.
You're right. Yeah.
What about sales? What about sales? Can they go to?
It will collapse because already, for example, if you now, it's completely when we were looking for cars or something and looking at it's completely unadvised to buy a diesel car anymore, because you can buy it, you will get it, but tomorrow when you want to sell it, 5 years or 2 years or 3 years
the value will go down. Yeah.
No, nobody will buy it. Because and in most of the cities in Europe, or at this moment already, you can't come with a diesel car. In Germany, most cities don't allow diesel cars to come in.
From an investment standpoint, this is fascinating, by the way. This just helped me a lot because I made a move. I'm always trying to stay with the natural gas-oriented investments.
Yeah.
Because I feel, and I'm always nervous about it, like EPD, I'm not going to talk a lot about it on this show, but I just got out of it because I had too much energy. I was like 25%, 26% energy. But the thing that made me nervous is they do a lot of exporting of natural gas liquids, which correlate with oil prices. So you go, forget it. I just want natural gas because they can't get rid of natural gas because you can't run everything on solar, and it is the cleanest fuel and safest fuel other than solar.
Okay,
So it has a future, I think, a bright future. But oil is really shaky. What you said is very shaky.
We're going to bring in now the Honorable David M. Walker, who's the former Comptroller General of the United States and author of America 2040, Still a Superpower. So let's welcome the Honorable David M. Walker to the show. Thank you for joining us, David. We were talking about the greatest threats to America, and Ben Banerjee, who's with the Swiss Impact Investment Association, said, how about this one to be a big problem? Our climate and our climate change. So what are your thoughts about this, David? And what are the thoughts of the
Climate change is a real issue. It is a challenge. We can debate how much of it is attributable to man. Some of it clearly is. My understanding is within the last 2 weeks, UK scientists have issued a study saying that the average temperature on Earth actually went down in the last 5 years, not up. But we know that the oceans are rising. We know that in certain parts of the world, climate change is having an impact on not just temperatures, but also, water supplies and the amount of rainfall that you get. It's having an impact on the severity of hurricanes and cyclones and other types of weather events. And so it's real, at the same point in time, we need to balance environmental and economic considerations. And one of the things that I came in on the tail end of is, the United States used to be energy independent, and that was a big priority for us. And now all of a sudden we're taking a number of steps that are making us dependent again. And one of the big debates we have right now that I heard you talking about is electric vehicles. And I don't recall when the automobile was invented that the U.S. government ended up building gas stations all around the country. And I don't think the U.S. government ought to be building recharging stations all around the country. One of the concerns that I really have is the government now is getting the business of spending money on things that don't generate revenues. And yet letting the private sector benefit from all the revenues. So you privatize all the gains, you socialize all the losses. That's not a sustainable strategy over time. And I agree, by the way, with Peter that natural gas is got to have a bright future. It's the cleanest of the fossil fuels, and it's got to have a bright future.
Wow. What you said, though, is very interesting, especially for companies like Tesla, that we look at that on Economics Monday. Its price earnings ratio is like 1,000, sometimes as high as 1,500. It's out the door, David, in terms of the PE ratios. However, if the government of the United States is going to finance Tesla, which it looks like that's what's going on right now, because they finance their space mission. Now they're going to finance by putting in charging stations. Then all of a sudden Tesla as a stock looks pretty good, but only it's because the government's pumping money into Tesla. So what are your thoughts about that?
And you also have to figure out where does the electricity, how is it generated?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. People think that electric cars are something magic. The electricity comes from someplace. What's the source of the fuel that generated the electricity?
Yeah.
A lot of, we're moving from coal to natural gas. There's a limit, there's resistance to expanding the number of nuclear power plants, which is the cleanest, although we have nuclear waste we've got to deal with. It's a huge problem, that we've got to come to grips with. So, it's a real challenging situation.
Ben, though, you had an interesting solution that Norway does. I found that to be interesting. How does Norway handle the financing, or basically the EVs that are out there?
Yeah. No, a couple of things, because the energy when you have an EV, you have to get it charged. And what Dave mentioned is correct. you have to pay attention to where the energy is coming from. And yes, indeed, we pay attention to where the energy is coming from, whether it is coming from coal power or hydroelectric or gas powered. This is one of the terms where you always look into it. Secondly, if we are talking about why the government is paying, I don't know the US, whether the government is paying for the infrastructure or not. And even if they are paying it, my question would be, shouldn't you be asking, instead of saying why the government is paying money to put the EVs power station, another question which people very often forget is that how much money the government has been spending, and this is not only for US, for the whole world, as subsidies to the petrol. This subsidy is far beyond the total subsidy that the global governments are doing at this moment on alternative energy production is about 40 billion. 45 or 40, I'm not 100% sure of the exact number. But the amount that the governments are subsidizing on petrol is more than 900 billion. So I would say that people should start considering also these hidden subsidies which are in the petroleum industry. If
I
the
have a
government just
counterpoint
has
to
to
that,
budget it
Ben.
out.
Ben, I'd like to. I have a question too, which is related
Yeah,
to this.
no, I just wanted to finish with the third point.
Oh, sure.
Is that the when we are talking about the CO2 emission, when we use coal or petrol, this CO2 emission is also causing a lot of damage, whether it's environmental, whether it's biodiversity. So we have to look into all this. And what Nick, you mentioned about Norway, what Norway is doing is that it is using hydroelectric mainly for the infrastructure to charge the cars or to produce the electricity. So most of the time, if you drive to Norway, but it's not only for Norway, it's also for Switzerland and most of the European countries. When you go to a car charging where you charge your car, it generally says with a stamp where the electricity is coming from and how it is produced. And there are different sources.
I guess I have 3 points. One, I mean, again, I'm not against what you're saying, Ben, because I am concerned about global warming. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about maybe getting a place down in Florida at one point, just dreaming of it, and then I realized that the place I wanted in the Miami area was, prone to flooding, and I'm going, this doesn't seem like a good investment because I could lose it in 20 years. Miami Beach, particularly, is sinking, by the way, and it was built on sand to begin with. So, but there could be a huge water problem in Miami, and there's a lot of issues there. But so first of all, I throw in there, I mean, these Norwegian countries have an advantage in terms of hydroelectric and geothermal. Not a lot of the world cannot do that. You need rivers and you need, to have access to the core of the earth in cold climate, to do this. And so that's not realistic. But my second point is, and again, I'm not opposed to what you're saying, Ben, because I am concerned about it. But when they say they're giving so much subsidies to oil and gas, my understanding is a lot of that is just what they do to every business. In other words, if Amazon goes out and buys, trucks, or Costco opens up 2 stores and they spend money, they get to depreciate it and they get to, use as an expense. Businesses, even if I buy a computer, I can write it off because it's an expense. So a lot of that money that they're saying, oh, they're subsidizing it. No, they're giving what any business is. A petroleum company goes out, buys land, puts in an oil rig. They get to depreciate the oil rig over time or expense it, and they get to depreciate the land over time because they're using up the minerals. So, but I don't know if that's really such a valid point, but I'm not opposed to, maybe subsidizing the EVs if there's a climate issue. It becomes a social good, like Adam Smith said, where, maybe we need to protect the environment and we should be investing in it. Again, I'm again a little agnostic based on what you just said, David, that the English study just showed, 5 years is down, but so maybe it's just areas. But I tend to agree with you, Ben. I tend to agree that it's warming up. So here's my question: do is carbon sequestration? It's an interesting topic. I'm not an expert on it, and I thought you might know more. It's basically companies taking the carbon from fossil fuels and segregating it, and you can probably explain this better, and then they put it under the ground or something. And I do know TRP, one of my investments, is now doing a big project with Pembina Pipeline, another Canadian company, where they're doing carbon sequestration. So is that a valid solution? Can it help? Is it unaffordable? What can you tell us about that?
It's a small solution at this moment. You can't solve the whole problem with it, but very, very small part of it with carbon sequestration, because we are working also on many solutions on that, and that there's innovation going on. People are looking into it.
Is it very expensive? Is that why it can't grow?
No.
Or?
No. It is not expensive. It's still not growing because people still do not have the capacity to do it. And the major till now the technology we know or what we have, it will need too much of land, and that land is not available yet. So that is one of the issue. But there are ways. There are people who are trying to catch the carbon where it is being produced, like you yourself mentioned, at the production companies or at the power stations to catch the carbon there. But one of the solutions, which is really people often do not pay enough attention, is biosequestration, because forestry and plants are extremely efficient and extremely good at it. Or mangroves, they're extremely good at taking carbon out and putting it under the ground. So we don't have to only focus on technologies, but we can also use bio facilities which are available on our planet to sequester, to take the carbon out. And also don't forget the oceans. Every second breath we are taking, thanks to the oceans, they provide us with 50% of the oxygen. So the oceans have also a massive capacity to take out CO2 from the atmosphere. Only problem is we are producing it much faster than all these can take it out.
Let me jump in if I can, Nick. I think one of the things that we have to recognize as well is that climate change does not respect geopolitical boundaries.
Yeah.
And that the solutions need to be global solutions. Western Europe can do, the EU can do what it wants, the United States can do what it wants to try to combat this, other countries can. But if we don't get China, India, and the third world on board, we're not going to solve the problem. And I guess the question that I would ask is, Ben, who's paying for the charging stations in Europe?
I was just going to say, before you joined in, Dave, we were having the same discussion also about China and India. So we did go over these points about how to hold them responsible, but still the consumption of China, of course, is nearly a quarter of the whole world's consumption. Production. But in Europe, we discussed this point. Then, if you want, I can again repeat it.
Just very quickly, please.
That China is catching up very fast. So they are already greenifying their economy. They are the world's biggest wind energy, solar energy producers. So they are catching up very fast. They have outspaced Europe. They have outpaced US. So they are under the whole idea why China started with it is China, it's a very authoritative government. It is very, very touchy about its public and the public sentiment. And with the smog and the pollution that was happening in the major Chinese cities, the government could not come forward saying that, oops, sorry, it is such a big problem, we can't solve it. So that's why they jumped in and they started cleaning up. So China is greenifying faster than nearly any country in the world.
Well, they're also an oil importing country, so they've got an incentive.
They are exporting a lot. That's what Europe also did. That's all. So that's one part. And then your second question you mentioned is, how is Europe financing it? Europe is financing it mainly because these investments are also creating jobs, are creating far more. I don't know the real numbers. For example, California, what I last read, more people are working in renewable energies than in the fossil fuel industry. So in Europe, there's huge amount of work being created by these innovative companies coming up. And the infrastructures are being paid by many of them, you would be surprised, by oil companies themselves.
Yeah.
So most of the oil companies have put aside huge funds for investments in renewable.
As they should. See, that's the private sector. They make the investment, they're going to get the gain, right? What I have a problem with is the government, building all these things, and the private sector gets all the gain.
Yeah. No, in Europe, the private sector is very, very strongly doing it, is pushing for it. So in CLC, where I'm on the board, it's the biggest business organization of Europe, with all the major European companies are members of us, and they are really pushing it. So the companies are pushing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it is a big problem that the private industry is actually being funded by government over here in terms of that. But Ben, it sounds to me that China actually has, an incentive to slow, in other words, not have carbon emission growth because basically they don't have any oil. So they're looking really to move toward EVs over there because it actually makes sense for them to do that. But what about the United States and other countries? Why would a country be incentivized to solve, which is really a global problem? In other words, why do we care that we pollute here in the U.S. and it affects people worldwide? Because, you know, it'll hurt our economy if we have to switch over to renewable energies. How do you incentivize people to say, okay, let's go to renewable energy? How do you do that?
It's because the economical damages US is now facing, if with the climate change, but also if it does not catch up, if it does not convert. Like, for example, US, one of the biggest sales you have is your car industry. But
Right.
if tomorrow China says we are not buying any car which are fossil fueled, or EU says we are not buying any cars which are fossil fueled, US car industry has a problem. So because US is a very, very powerful exporting country, and so it has to fulfill the regulations that are being put into places and all around the world. So to be able, okay, I may be a bit biased, but I sincerely believe in the world of innovation and technology, US leads the world. It always has the last, I think, many decades. So, and US is also the alternative energy, the renewable energy. US is leading. I don't know if you're aware of it, but US is really leading the world. Most of the technologies we are talking about Tesla. It's a US company. Most of the technologies we in Europe are using, or in China, or everywhere we are using, is often coming out of US.
Mm-hmm.
So US has already made the transformation. Only it hasn't reached the political level yet, but on the ground level, US is changing very fast.
By the way, speaking about auto industry, don't forget that the Ford and General Motors are heavily moving into electric vehicles and trucks production. And I think Tesla will be a drop of water in the ocean of General Motors and Ford's electric vehicle coming in. And that obviously will develop the US export market, because this cars will do everywhere else in Europe, in China, everywhere people will buy these cars. So don't forget about its main bread and butter US industries.
Exactly.
Are moving into electric vehicles.
Exactly.
Well, the other way that you can incent it is through the price of gasoline. I mean, frankly, most Americans don't realize that we pay a fraction of the cost for a liter or a gallon of gasoline that Europe and other parts of the world do. You know, and that's another way that you can end up encouraging it. But I will tell you this: I have a Porsche 911S, and it is a gas-consuming vehicle. And somebody asked me, why didn't I buy one of the new Taycans, which are very quick and whatever else, but they're electric? I like to hear my sports car.
Yeah, my ex-wife says the same. She also likes the manual. She still doesn't like an automatic car. She likes the manuals.
Mine's PDK. Mine's automatic with PDK, which is what race cars are.
Yeah. I have an Avalon hybrid that gets 40 miles to the gallon. I like not paying for your gas. So, you know.
My other car's like that. I have my other car's like that, but it's not.
Really?
It's a BMW. No, it's a Mini Cooper.
Yeah, it's not fun to drive.
Amazing.
It doesn't have fun to drive. But what I do is I take my gas savings and I buy Exxon stock with it. So, you know, what can I tell you?
I have a boring Mercedes. I can't hear the engine. It's so quiet. It's very comfortable car. And what I like about Mercedes is that you have to service it only once a year. So I never had cars. Just once a year. I love about that. 40 minutes and you're back to drive. That's really fantastic.
Yeah. I think you all can guess which car I have, and it doesn't even need servicing.
Done youth servicing.
It's a Tesla.
A Tesla, right? David, what is Washington, D.C. doing about, or are they doing anything with climate change and politics? Since I know you live in the big tower of power, do we have a consensus or a plan? Because I know you wrote the book America 2040, which I really like, still a superpower. But my question is there any plan when it comes to how we're addressing climate? And even further, can those people even get along on the Hill right now to make any plan at all in Washington, D.C.?
There's not a consensus right now. I mean, right now, when you look in Washington, we've got a big bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's about $1 trillion. In my view, it's going to pass. There was a little bump in the road when it turned out when the Congressional Budget Office scored it. It said it was going to add to the deficit about $250 billion over a number of years, rather than fully paying for itself. But the next debate is going to be is a partisan debate, highly partisan debate, about a $3.5 trillion bill that includes a number of proposed investments in quote unquote human infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, et cetera. And there is no consensus on that. This first bill is dealing with traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, dams, waterways, ports, but also broadband. It also gets into broadband, which is to try to deal with some of the parts of the country that aren't sufficiently connected to the internet. But the next one, I think, it's doubtful that it will pass because, it is a huge expansion, in many ways, a huge expansion of mandatory spending, which is already over 70% of spending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in your book, you were saying that one of the biggest threats to the United States not maintaining its superpower status is the debt to GDP ratio. Haven't we already exceeded that? Isn't the U.S. on track to be, in other words, forget climate change? Aren't we on at least for right now, sorry, Ben, but isn't the United States on track to have basically a big economic crash if we continue spending money with no end in sight by putting it on the U.S. credit card?
We are near passing the all-time limit of debt to GDP, which was established at the end of World War II, but we got something for that. I mean, we defeated the Axis powers, we saved the free world, we avoided attack on continental United States, and after World War II, we invested in traditional infrastructure, we invested in human infrastructure via the GI Bill, we restored fiscal responsibility, we grew the economy, including investing in defeated powers and promoting global trade. And debt to GDP plummeted from about 106% to 35% by 1980. But now we're about at the 106 again. But unlike the end of World War II, we're going up rather than going down. And so the two things that we have to focus on is debt to GDP and interest as a percentage of the budget. Interest as a percentage of the budget is not a problem right now, because interest rates are not market rates, they're artificially low, and the Fed is engaged in unprecedented actions of buying most of the new U.S. debt. So we don't have market forces really working right now, and so we've got to come to grips with this. And frankly, the last thing that we need is to increase mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is almost impossible to reverse. As I say in the book, I think there's only two things that shouldn't have an annual cap on spending. Number one is Social Security, because you can manage it in a way that you don't need an annual cap. And secondly, interest, because you can't cap it. You got to pay what the market says. Everything else ought to have a cap on how much you're going to spend. You don't write blank checks, especially when you're in a situation as we are. And by the way, we need to spend more on investments, but a lot less on consumption.
David, my forecast is for zero interest rates in about 7 years, 8 years, roughly. And that's why that part of it I'm not worried about, because, look, we have negative interest rates around the world. They do yield curve control. Basically, the Fed can step in like they did for 11 years during World War II, and Japan did in 2016, and they say any amount of money any yield over a certain amount. Like, let's say they said any yield over 2%, we'll just buy the bonds ourselves. So, but there's distortions in the economy that I'm concerned
Right.
with. But the
Right.
Republicans for years have been arguing inflation, inflation, inflation. And I think it's a weak argument because it hasn't happened for 40 years and interest rates of debt has been going up and interest rates have been going down. It's when you hit zero that they're going to be the biggest distortions because basically you're going to have almost no growth. So
that's the bottom line. No growth. With no growth,
right.
Less opportunity, increased gaps between the haves and the have-nots. Absolutely. I think the issue is economic growth, the lack of economic growth, and what the implications are of that.
But yet the Republican Party for 40 years and even now is arguing, oh, big inflation. And I think we're going to have some energy inflation in the next 6 months, housing inflation. You're always going to get when interest rates are dropping. Yeah. But other things, technology is deflationary, demographics are deflationary. We have a lot of deflationary factors. So I think that in a lot of ways, the Republican argument, I wish they'd switch, their argument and start saying it's not inflation. It's the fact that we're never going to have high interest rates and people are not going to make any more money because
it's stagnation.
Yeah, exactly.
Stagnation.
Yeah.
David, I have a question about the infrastructure bill. Remember that at the beginning of the 50s, United States was ahead of anybody else in the world in the railway business. All the passengers and everything, freight industry, everything was moving by rails. Now, in the 50s, when U.S. started to build interstate, and then the airport, so people, at least passengers, start to get away from railway to car travel and the airway travel. So essentially today, there is only one company, Amtrak, that still carries passengers traffic, and all other companies was closed long time ago. The freight is still doing really well. So we don't worry about that part. However, now by charging creating this charge.
Creating what? I lost you.
Sasha, you're
muted, Sasha.
You muted.
You muted, Sasha. Oh, your connection got lost, Sasha. You're muted.
Well, let me just mention something while he's trying to reconnect.
Okay.
The United States crosses a continent. So we've got a lot of territory that we have to cover, all right? When you can fly in a fraction of the time for about the same or less cost that it would cost to go up by rail, that's one of the reasons. The other thing is the United States does not have high-speed rail.
Right.
It's a bad joke. We have something called the Acela, which is supposed to be our high-speed rail. And to tell you how slow it is, there are some parts between New York City and Stamford, Connecticut that I can run faster than the train goes.
No.
Not because I'm the world's fastest human.
Not everybody is a good runner like you.
Because we're trying to run commuter rail, interstate rail, freight rail on too few tracks, over extremely old bridges, and inadequate infrastructure. So there's more that we need to do on rail, especially with regard to, let's say, for example, Washington to Boston, the West Coast. There are certain parts where I think you could get a lot more rail traffic if we had truly high-speed rail, as in other parts of the world. But
Dave, can I ask you a question? Maybe it's a pure academic question, but in Europe, in the EU, the EU bank or the central bank has been buying all the EU debts in the last, I think, couple of years. They are spending they're buying like 80 billion, something like that per month. All the junk bond of Italy and Portugal, and EU central bank is buying and buying and buying, and is pumping money into the market. It's going on since a couple of years. And everybody expected inflation, but somehow the inflation is not coming. What is your theory about that? Why isn't no inflation happening while the central bank is flooding the market with money?
well, part of it is do you have full employment yet? Do you have full employment in Europe?
No.
Yeah, and also I did a few points to that. One, first of all, number one, your point is there's no inflation, but what is inflation relative to interest rates? In other words,
Oh, yeah.
if you have 10% interest rates and you have 5% inflation, then you can make money on your money. But if you have zero or negative interest rates, if you have 2% inflation, which is where I think the world is heading, in the United States, where we'll have some inflation, but interest rates are zero, and when stocks absorb that fact, then they won't go up either, because they'll account for, okay, I'll take even lower yields on stocks because I'm accepting the fact that we're at zero rates. But I'm guessing inflation in Europe is higher than zero. It's just relative.
Yeah.
So look, if you're 60 years old and retiring, or 30 years old and trying to buy a house, either way you get hammered, because if you're 60 and you retire and maybe on a pension and or fixed amount of money, and then it eats away at just 2%, but you can't earn that 2%, or let's say it earns 3 and you get 1. Now you're losing 2% of your power every year, which really hurts the whole society, by the way, because now you have less people who could consume and they have to tighten up their budget. And for the 30-year-old, because interest rates go down, they can afford more. Housing prices keep going up. So you get inflation in housing, maybe inflation in energy, probably inflation in energy, and maybe a few other things. But overall, the inflation isn't massive because you're comparing to zero or negative.
Current policy penalizes savers.
Yeah.
And
Europe definitely.
And encourages borrowers.
Right. Or you better invest in the market. And we're going to have to wind down now. I want to thank our special guest, the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. Thank you. Also, Ben Banerjee, the president of the Swiss Impact Investment Association in Zug, Switzerland. We're going to resume our programming on September 20th because I'm going over to Switzerland to visit Ben. And I'm going to be in Switzerland, Italy, and Paris, and Athens. So I'm going to be hanging out with him this month. Well, thanks Sasha Starr from Canada, Modern Investing with Sasha and Peter Bennett. Yeah, I should be there on Wednesday. I had an $800,000 problem come up, so I had to beam off. Sorry about last Wednesday, but I should be there. And the Honorable David M. Walker, we're going to resume on September 20th. Okay. Economics Monday. I want to thank our listeners around the world. Very hot topic that we discussed today, which of course is climate change and of course climate change in politics. And we'll see you on our second season, our fall season on modern investing. But we'd like to thank our viewers around the world for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you.